Shabbat Shalom. So listen, if you would, for a moment to some excerpts from a recent political speech. And please try to hear these words with nonpartisan ears. After all the insults and the warnings, the real divide in our free and democratic country isn't between the left and the right. The real divide is between moderates and extremists, those who want to build and those who want to destroy. We will not let extremists destroy our country. We will not let hate control us. Violent racists do not become patriots just because they wrap themselves in a flag. They will not define what it means to love our country. We are not enemies. What we have in common is this country. What we have in common is the understanding that you cannot claim to love our country if you hate half of your fellow citizens. Our nation's Declaration of Independence aspires to ensure equality for each of our citizens. Sounds familiar, yes? These words are from a speech that the incoming Israeli Foreign Minister, Yair Lapid, had prepared for the swearing in of Israel's new coalition government this past Sunday in Jerusalem's Knesset. Truth is, Lapid never delivered this speech. He had set it aside to reprimand members of the departing coalition government for their non-stop heckling of incoming Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. As the Wall Street Journal reporter William Galston writes, the best political speech in many years was not delivered. So here's the heart of Minister Lapid's speech, keeping in mind words intended to be heard by all 120 members of the Knesset. He wrote, "Before we look to the future, we have another task. We need to find a way to forgive one another. Hate is a prison, and forgiveness is the way out." Lapid's party received the most votes, thus claiming the highest number of seats, 17 seats, in the new coalition government. The name of Lapid's party is Yesh Atid, translated as "there is a future." Yet Lapid knows before he and the incoming coalition government can look to the future, there needs to be forgiveness. And let's be clear that Lapid is talking about not, for a first step, forgiveness between Israelis and Palestinians. God willing, that will come someday. The first step, Lapid asserts, is forgiveness within the household of Israel. Perhaps Minister Lapid, a secular Jew yet well-schooled in Torah, was channeling this week's Torah portion, Chukat. As the Israelites are coming closer to entering the Promised Land, Moses sends messengers to the king of Edom, asking permission to simply pass through their land in order to get to the Jordan River and cross into Canaan. Moses scripts the messengers appealed to the king, saying, "Thus says your brother Israel, you know the hardships that have befallen us, that our ancestors went down to Egypt, that we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and that the Egyptians dwelt harshly with us and our ancestors." Moses hopes the message will move the king to act with compassion, to allow them to peacefully cross through the land of Edom. Yet, this was not the king's response at all. He answers saying, "You shall not pass through us, else we go against you with the sword." Edom went out against the Israelites in heavy force, strongly armed. Edom would not let Israel cross their territory, and Israel turned away from them. Rabbi Shiheld poses the question, summoned to respond with kindness and generosity to his brother's plight. The king of Edom fails. Why? Why does the king show no compassion at all for his brother? And the answer, sadly and tragically, goes back to deep-seated hatred within the early generations of our patriarchs. You know the story from the book of Genesis, how callously Jacob treats his older twin brother Esau. Exhausted and famished from a long day in the field, Jacob takes advantage of his brother's momentary vulnerability, negotiating Esau's hereditary birthright for a simple bowl of stew. And to add insult to injury, Jacob later hoodwinks his aging father Isaac, whose eyes are dimmed, by impersonating his older brother Esau, thus stealing the father's blessing intended for Esau. When Esau learns of his brother's conniving and dishonesty, he vows to kill Jacob. Memory, as Rabbi Held reminds us, can be a double-edged sword. We can remember kindness done to us and seek to repay those who showed kindness. And we remember kindnesses not done to us, and we can commit never to abandon those in need of love and kindness. But we can also remember past crimes and humiliations in hopes of one day paying back the mistreatment from our enemies. If we cannot punish them now, perhaps our grandchildren will make theirs suffer. Memory can deepen empathy, but it can nurture antipathy. It can be redemptive, but it can be profoundly toxic. Biblical genealogy traces Esau's offspring to the Edomites, and Moses is well aware of his family roots, addressing the Edomite king as a brother. And the king of Edom, too, remembers all too well what Jacob had done centuries earlier to his twin brother Esau. Instead of girding themselves for battle with the Edomites, the Israelites choose to turn around and take the longer route to the promised land. Moses doesn't just decide to take a longer route. later in the story, before he sends the Israelites across the Jordan, now under Joshua's leadership, he commands them, "Do not hate an Edomite, for he is your brother." It's as if Israel's new foreign minister, Yair Lapid, was carrying the biblical story of Jacob and Esau, the Israelites and the Edomites, on to the floor of the Knesset. Before Yesh Atid, before the name of Lapid's party, before there is any hope for the future, Lapid understands that forgiveness comes first. You cannot forgive if you carry the poison of hatred in your heart. The people's encounter with Edom on its way to the land of promise is intended as a warning and awakening. When you settle in the land, people who are hungry and exhausted come looking for help. Treat them not as yourselves were treated, but as you would have wanted to be treated. The solution, Lapid says, is not to treat the opposition the same way. The solution is to behave differently. Yair Lapid is not naive. He knows intimately the diversity of the new coalition that he, more than anyone else, is responsible for creating. To get a bare majority of 61 seats, 61 out of 120, it required cobbling together an unlikely group of partners. The right and the left, the secular and religious, an Islamic Arab party, pro-settlement, anti-settlement. It's about as diverse as you can get. Will it hold together? Well, needless to say, that remains to be seen. But Lapid is correct. Like it or not, we are bound together by our common citizenship and the common good, whether as Israeli or American. Both of our countries can carry our respective passports with great pride, passports that breathe the oxygen of democracy, passports grounded in our respective declarations of independence. We can hear Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, in his words, to foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, to be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel, to ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex, to guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture, to safeguard the holy places of all religions. And can we hear Thomas Jefferson's voice? We hold these truths, to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. May the heavy lifting of forgiveness and reconciliation clear the cluttered path before us, one step at a time. realizing the aspirations set before us, indeed being a light unto the nations.